Today is June 11th, 2026, and the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman said something on June 10th that deserves to be placed at the center of every analytical frame through which this conflict is understood. Speaking about the relationship between Iran's diplomatic track and its military operations, the simultaneous dispatching of Qatari negotiators to Tehran, and the launching of ballistic missiles at Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan's Muwafaq Salti air base, he did not characterize these as contradictory or as a diplomatic paradox that required explanation. He stated, "Diplomacy and the military campaign are not two separate fields. Both are tools to protect Iran's interests." Read that sentence for what it is. It is not a diplomatic misstep or an inflammatory comment made in frustration after a difficult night of air defense exchanges. It is the explicit public articulation of Iranian strategic doctrine, the formal statement that negotiations are not an alternative to war and have never been intended as one. They are the other instrument in the same toolkit. This doctrine statement is the specific analytical key that unlocks 38 failed deal declarations. It explains why the most optimistic deal language of the conflict's duration was followed within 24 hours by the Shahed drone that struck the Apache. It explains why Mohammad Marandi, a close advisor to the Iranian Foreign Ministry, simultaneously issued an ultimatum on June 10th, whose specific demand list constitutes not a negotiating position, but a rescue package for a regime under existential pressure. And it explains why the four central issues in the nuclear negotiations, whose specific parameters were revealed on June 10th for the first time with numbers attached, are being discussed in a diplomatic environment where the Iranian side's formal position is that diplomacy and military operations are both tools, and each tool is deployed according to what the Iranian national interest requires in any given moment. But let's back all the way up. Because to understand why the Marandi ultimatum's specific demands, frozen asset return, end to Gaza operations, cessation of Lebanon strikes, blockade lifting, sanctions cancellation, constitute a rescue list for a regime rather than a negotiating position for a government, why the specific nuclear negotiating parameters now publicly known, a U.S. demand for a 20-year enrichment freeze, an Iranian offer of 10 years, an anticipated compromise around 15, represent the one dimension of the diplomatic track where progress was documented before the June 8-9 exchange disrupted it, why the reported discovery of sophisticated Israeli electronic surveillance equipment in the Lavasan area northwest of Tehran, whether real or fabricated, tells you something critical about the Iranian regime's internal state, regardless of whether the equipment actually exists, why the Lebanese president's criticism of Iranian interference and Hezbollah's sharp public response is the signal that Iran's Ring of Fire regional architecture is losing the political ground in Lebanon that it has relied on for 3 decades, and why the specific form of weakness that Iranian President Pezeshkian revealed when he said it is unacceptable for the enemy to be able to kill our commanders so easily is an admission that belongs at the center of the strategic picture. You need to hold every layer of this analysis simultaneously. Here's where things stand as of June 11th, 2026. And every diplomatic, military, and political development from June 10th requires analytical treatment in the same frame. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghei stated that diplomacy and the military campaign are not two separate fields, and that both are tools to protect Iran's interests. Mohammad Marandi, an advisor to the Iranian Foreign Ministry, issued an ultimatum stating, "There will be no agreement with the Trump administration until the United States surrenders to Iran's demands, specifically return of frozen Iranian assets, end of the war in Gaza, stopping strikes in Lebanon, lifting the blockade on Iran, and canceling sanctions." Iranian President Pezeshkian stated that only in the enemy's dreams will Iran surrender or retreat from its positions, and added, "We cannot accept a situation in which the enemy can kill our commander so easily." Diplomatic and official sources confirmed that the sides are discussing 4 central issues on the nuclear program: pause in uranium enrichment, with the U.S. demanding at least 20 years and Iran offering 10 years, with a compromise around 15 years potentially available. Security authorities in Iran reported finding sophisticated electronic surveillance equipment in the Lavasan area northwest of Tehran, claiming it served as a ground guidance station for Israeli Air Force operations from inside Iranian territory. No independent evidence confirming this claim has been presented. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun criticized Iranian interference in Lebanon. Hezbollah responded sharply with MP Hussein El-Haj Hassan claiming the Lebanese government is eager for hostility toward Iran and eager for Israel's interests. An American diplomatic proposal for Lebanon includes 4 steps: Israeli withdrawal, Lebanese army deployment, Hezbollah withdrawal, and resident return, with the IDF maintaining presence at key security points until full implementation. A Palestinian refugee with Ukrainian citizenship named Khalid al-Aid, held by Hezbollah on espionage suspicions, escaped during Israeli strikes on the Dahiyeh district of Beirut in March, and disappeared into the Ukrainian embassy compound in the Babda area of Beirut. Approximately 20 Iranian targets were struck in the U.S. strikes of June 9th, according to American officials. U.S. strikes on June 9th reportedly destroyed approximately 55% of the air defense infrastructure that Iran had managed to partially restore during the ceasefire period. That is the complete analytical picture. Now, let's take it apart, layer by layer. The Baghai Doctrine statement is the analytical starting point because it is the most honest thing any Iranian official has said publicly about the relationship between Iran's diplomatic engagement and its military operations in the entire conflict's duration, and it requires being taken at face value rather than minimized as rhetorical excess. Diplomacy and the military campaign are not two separate fields. Both are tools to protect Iran's interests. This sentence, stated publicly by the Iranian Foreign Ministry's official spokesman on June 10th, is the explicit articulation of why the parallel track architecture that the previous analysis documented. Qatari negotiators in Tehran on the same day Trump was declaring more strikes were coming, is not a diplomatic contradiction. It is a design feature. Iran does not use diplomacy as an alternative to military pressure. It uses diplomacy as a concurrent instrument alongside military pressure, deploying whichever tool produces the better result in any given moment and using the other tool to prevent the first from producing a result that requires actually delivering on its commitments. Read what this doctrine means for the 38 failed deal declarations that Trump has accumulated since February 28th. Every declaration that a deal was imminent was a moment at which the diplomatic tool appeared to be producing the desired outcome, reducing American military pressure, extending the timeline, creating space for the regime to breathe. Every subsequent Iranian action that invalidated the deal, the Shahed against the Apache, the missile campaigns against Gulf states, the blockade violation attempts, was the concurrent deployment of the military tool to prevent the diplomatic tool's apparent progress from actually requiring Iran to meet the 6 red lines requirements. The tools are not in contradiction, they are in coordination. The regime uses whichever one serves the institutional survival requirement at each specific moment. Now let's get into the Morandi ultimatum and why the specific structure of its demands constitutes a rescue package for a regime rather than a negotiating position for a government. Mohammad Morandi's demands, frozen asset return, and to Gaza operations, cessation of Lebanon strikes, blockade lifting, and sanctions cancellation, are notable not just for their individual elements, but for their ordering and their relationship to the 6 red lines requirements. Notice what is missing from Morandi's ultimatum: any concession on the uranium enrichment program, any concession on the Strait of Hormuz's status under international maritime law, any concession on the ballistic missile program. The 5 demands in the ultimatum are all demands for the removal of pressure from Iran, while offering nothing on the items that constitute the American position's minimum requirements for resolving the conflict. This is the specific structure of the rescue package. Stop hurting us, give us our money back, remove the military forces protecting your allies, let our oil flow again, and cancel the economic instruments that are destroying our economy. The unstated position underneath these 5 demands is, if you do all of this, we will return to the pre-February 28th status quo, where the nuclear program was advancing, the proxies were operational, and the IRGC was collecting the Strait of Hormuz's economic leverage. That is what the ultimatum is asking for. Not a resolution of the conflict, not a framework for addressing the 6 red lines. A restoration of the conditions that existed before Operation Epic Fury removed the economic and military capacity that made those conditions sustainable for Iran. The demands are a rescue package because they are the specific conditions whose fulfillment would rescue the regime from the trajectory it is currently on, rather than producing the resolution the 6 red lines require. Now let's get into the nuclear negotiating parameters. Because the specific numbers, 20 years U.S. demand, 10 years Iranian offer, 15-year potential compromise, are the first concrete quantitative parameters to appear in the public record of the nuclear dimension of the diplomatic track. And their revelation matters for understanding where the one dimension of the negotiations, where progress was actually documented, stood before the June 8-9 exchange disrupted it. A 20-year freeze on uranium enrichment is the U.S. position on the minimum duration of a verifiable pause in the enrichment program that would constitute a genuine departure from the nuclear weapons pathway. The logic is that a pause shorter than 20 years does not provide sufficient time for the verification infrastructure, the monitoring architecture, and the geopolitical conditions to develop to a point where the pause can be confidently maintained and the reconstitution risk managed. 20 years also represents a specific threshold. It extends past the operational deployment timeline of any current Iranian political leadership, meaning the commitment cannot be treated as a temporary concession that a new government immediately revokes. Iran's offer of 10 years reflects the specific institutional constraint that any commitment longer than 10 years requires acknowledgement that the nuclear program's current trajectory, toward a weapons capability cannot be resumed within the planning horizon of any current Iranian political actor. 10 years is the offer of a pause that the current regime's successors could reverse. 20 years is the offer of a pause that changes the strategic situation's architecture rather than simply delaying it. The potential compromise around 15 years is the negotiating midpoint that both sides' diplomats have apparently identified as the possible landing zone, long enough that the American position can characterize it as a genuine strategic change rather than a tactical delay, and short enough that the Iranian position can characterize it as a temporary confidence-building measure, rather than a permanent abandonment of the nuclear program's option value. The specific 15-year figure's appearance in the diplomatic reporting is the clearest signal that the nuclear negotiating track had made more progress than the public record of the failed proposals and thrown-back counterproposals suggests. Now let's get into the Lavasan surveillance equipment claim. Because the Iranian security authorities' announcement that they found sophisticated Israeli electronic surveillance equipment operating as a ground guidance station for Israeli Air Force operations from inside Iranian territory is one of those analytical situations where the claim's truth or falsity is less important than what the claim itself reveals about the Iranian regime's internal state. If the equipment is real, if Israeli intelligence or Mossad assets operating inside Iran actually deployed ground-based laser designation or navigation guidance infrastructure in the Lavasan area northwest of Tehran, it is one of the most significant intelligence achievements in the conflict's history. Ground-based guidance infrastructure inside Iranian territory would explain how Israeli and American aircraft have been able to strike targets inside Iran with the precision that has characterized the campaign from Operation Epic Fury's opening night through the June 9th radar strikes. It would explain how commanders have been targeted with the accuracy that Pezeshkian's own public statement implicitly acknowledged when he said it is unacceptable for the enemy to be able to kill our commanders so easily. If the equipment is fabricated, if the Iranian security apparatus is presenting manufactured evidence of Israeli espionage infrastructure in order to explain to the Iranian public how the enemy has managed to strike with such precision, the fabrication itself is the analytically significant element. A regime that needs to manufacture evidence of enemy infiltration to explain accurate strikes is a regime that has run out of acceptable explanations for why its air defenses, its command infrastructure, and its commanders are being hit by weapons that the regime claimed its defenses could stop. The regime is looking for spies because admitting that its air defense systems and its command security protocols are simply inadequate against the precision systems being deployed against it is more politically damaging than claiming infiltration. Pezeshkian's statement provides the key. We cannot accept a situation in which the enemy can kill our commanders so easily. This is the admission that the strikes are precise, that the commanders being targeted specifically rather than killed incidentally, and that the regime does not have a satisfactory explanation for how the targeting is achieving this precision. The Lavasan announcement, real or fabricated, is the regime's attempt to provide that explanation without admitting its air defense and operational security have been penetrated by the precision of the opposing campaign rather than by human intelligence networks operating inside Iran. Now let's get into the Ring of Fire doctrine analysis, because the degradation of Iran's proxy architecture is the strategic dimension that explains why Iran's IRGC is now fighting directly, attacking American Apache helicopters, launching ballistic missiles at Gulf state capitals, rather than through the proxy infrastructure that defined its regional power projection for 4 decades. The Ring of Fire was the doctrine whose design Iran executed consistently for decades before October 7th, and whose fundamental premise was that Iran never needs to fight directly against its enemies. The ring itself, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Iraqi militia networks and proxy and sleeper cell infrastructure across the region, was the buffer zone that guaranteed any attack on Iran would cost the attacker in multiple theaters simultaneously. The deterrence value was asymmetric. Attacking Iran would cost the attacker Hezbollah's rockets into Israeli cities, Houthi attacks on Gulf shipping and Saudi infrastructure, Hamas operations from Gaza, and militia harassment of American forces in Iraq. The cost asymmetry was designed to make the deterrent credible without requiring Iran to deploy its own military forces directly. The proxy infrastructure's degradation across the years since October 7th is the specific reason that doctrine has required revision. Hezbollah's sustained operational engagement with the IDF in Lebanon has left it a significantly diminished version of its pre-October 7th organization. Fewer trained fighters, degraded weapon stocks, weakened political standing in Lebanon itself. The Houthis have sustained multiple American and Israeli strike campaigns and barely participated in the recent exchange that might have been expected to trigger their maximum effort response. Hamas in Gaza is operating at a fraction of its pre-October 7th capability. The Iraqi militia networks are under pressure from the Baghdad government. Iran's direct attacks, the Shahed against the Apache, the ballistic missile campaigns against Gulf states, are not a doctrinal choice. They are the operational expression of a ring of fire that has burned itself down to its last embers. When the proxies are too degraded to sustain the deterrence architecture, the IRGC itself must provide the deterrent. But the IRGC providing the deterrent directly is the condition whose operational implications the Ring of Fire doctrine was specifically designed to avoid. Iran's own military capacity being visibly expended against adversaries who can absorb the losses and respond with far greater precision and scale. Now let's get into the Lebanese political dimension, because Lebanese President Aoun's criticism of Iranian interference and Hezbollah's sharp public response is the signal that the political control Hezbollah has exercised over Lebanese political life is being publicly contested in a way that was not possible before the current conflict's phase. Hezbollah's response to Aoun's criticism, MP El-Hajj Hassan characterizing the Lebanese government as eager for hostility toward Iran and eager for Israel's interests, is the institutional expression of an organization that is accustomed to vetoing Lebanese government positions that contradict Hezbollah's Iran-aligned posture. But the response itself documents the problem. Hezbollah is now publicly attacking the Lebanese president for expressing Lebanese sovereignty. The equation Hezbollah built, that Lebanese sovereignty is served by aligning with Iran and resisting American and Israeli pressure, is losing credibility with Lebanese political actors who have watched the regime in Tehran conduct ballistic missile campaigns against Arab neighbors and fail to intercept American strikes on its own territory. The formula that political alignment with Hezbollah offers Lebanon protection and sovereignty is now producing the opposite. Lebanon's territory is being used for IRGC rocket launches that draw Israeli responses. The Lebanese government has no mechanism to prevent either the launches or the responses. The American diplomatic proposal for Lebanon, Israeli withdrawal, Lebanese army deployment, Hezbollah withdrawal, resident return, IDF presence at key security points until full implementation, is the framework whose specific sequencing Hezbollah is most resistant to. The Lebanese army deployment replacing Hezbollah's presence in southern Lebanon is the structural change that, if implemented, removes Hezbollah's territorial control over the area from which it conducts its most operationally significant operations against Israeli border communities. Hezbollah's institutional survival as a military organization requires maintaining territorial presence that the Lebanese army deployment would displace. The organization's response to both the Lebanese president's criticism and the American proposal's framework is the institutional expression of an organization that recognizes the moment is dangerous for its structural position in Lebanon in a way that previous diplomatic initiatives were not. The Khalid al-Aid case is the on-the-ground intelligence indicator of how this institutional pressure is expressing itself in Hezbollah's operational behavior. A Palestinian refugee with Ukrainian citizenship, held by Hezbollah on espionage suspicions, escaping during Israeli strikes on the Dahieh district and disappearing into the Ukrainian embassy compound in Babda, is the specific intelligence incident sequence that an organization confident in its security does not produce. An organization confident in its counterintelligence does not lose a high-priority espionage suspect during an airstrike. The escape itself, using the chaos of Israeli strikes as the operational window, suggests a level of preparation and external coordination that Hezbollah's stated ability to detect and prevent Israeli intelligence operations inside Lebanon is inadequate to address. Whether al-Aid was part of an Israeli intelligence network or not, his escape documents a specific gap in Hezbollah's counterintelligence coverage of its own detention facilities. Now let's bring all the tracks together, because the Baghai Doctrine Statement, the Morandi Rescue Package Ultimatum, the 20-10-15 nuclear parameters, the Lavassan Claim, Pezeshkian's commander admission, the Ring of Fire degradation, the Lebanese political ground shift, and the al-Aid escape converge on the complete strategic picture of where the Iranian position stands on June 11th. The doctrine track has revealed, through Baghai's explicit statement, that Iran's diplomatic and military tools are concurrent instruments rather than alternatives, which means every diplomatic opening is also a military cover opportunity, and every military exchange can be followed immediately by renewed diplomatic claims of victimhood. The ultimatum track has revealed, through Morandi's demand list, that what Iran is asking for is not a resolution of the conflict, but a restoration of the conditions that preceded it, a rescue package for a regime rather than a negotiating position for a peace. The nuclear track has revealed, through the 20-10-15 parameter reporting, that one specific dimension of the diplomatic track was producing documented progress before the Apache exchange disrupted it, and that the potential compromise number exists and has been identified by both sides' negotiators, even if the broader package cannot be finalized while the Baghai Doctrine is being applied. The command exposure track has revealed, through Pezeshkian's admission, that the regime cannot explain or prevent the precision with which its commanders are being targeted, and that the Lavassan surveillance claim, real or fabricated, is the regime's attempt to manage that admission's political implications. The proxy degradation track has revealed that the ring of fire that defined Iranian regional power for 4 decades has been degraded to the point where the IRGC is providing direct deterrent attacks rather than proxy-mediated ones. The condition, the ring of fire doctrine, was specifically designed to prevent Iran from being in. The Lebanon track has revealed that the political ground, Hezbollah controlled without contest, is being openly challenged by the Lebanese president, that the American proposal's framework threatens Hezbollah's territorial control in ways previous frameworks did not, and that Hezbollah's operational security is producing the kind of intelligence escape incidents that confident organizations do not produce. Here is the honest assessment of what the Baghai Doctrine Statement, the Morandi Rescue Demands, and the Pezeshkian Commander Admission mean for the conflict's trajectory as of June 11, 2026. Iran has declared, through its formal spokesman, that diplomacy and military operations are concurrent tools rather than alternatives. Iran has issued, through a foreign ministry advisor, an ultimatum whose demand list is a rescue package for a regime under existential pressure rather than a negotiating position for a government seeking resolution. Iran's president has admitted, through a statement about commander targeting, that the regime's command security has been penetrated beyond what its defenses can prevent. And Iran is searching for Israeli surveillance equipment in the suburbs of Tehran, because the precision of the strikes requires an explanation the regime cannot provide through conventional air defense failure. There are 2 interpretations of what the Baghai Doctrine Statement, diplomacy and military operations, are both tools, means for the conflict's next phase. The first interpretation is that the statement is the negotiating pressure that eventually forces American policy to engage the rescue package's conditions to some degree. That explicitly framing diplomacy as a military tool is the IRGC's warning that unless the economic pressure is relieved, the military tool will continue to be deployed, and that the specific cost of continued military tool deployment, Apache helicopters, Reaper drones, tankers that cannot deliver their cargoes, will eventually exceed the political cost of the compromise the 15-year nuclear parameter suggests is available. The second interpretation is that explicitly declaring diplomacy and military operations as concurrent tools is the statement that eliminates the diplomatic track's credibility as a conflict resolution mechanism. That a government whose formal spokesman characterizes negotiation as another form of warfare cannot produce an agreement that the American side can trust will be implemented, because the same doctrine that produced the Shahed against the Apache, while deal language was in the air, will produce the next Shahed against the next American asset, while the next deal framework is being constructed. Both interpretations produce the same analytical conclusion about the 15-year nuclear parameter. It exists. Both sides' negotiators have identified it as a possible landing zone. The question of whether it can be reached is determined not by the arithmetic of 20 and 10 averaging to 15, but by whether the IRGC's institutional command authority will authorize the civilian diplomatic track to actually deliver on the commitment that 15 years represents, or whether the next Shahed will launch 24 hours after the next deal language. Because diplomacy and the military campaign are not 2 separate fields.